Hi, my name is Al Getler, and I'm your host of Leader Be Led. This is WebTV for leaders, and we're really happy you're here with us. We have had some great guests so far in Leader Be Led. You can find some of our previous episodes right here on either YouTube or on this website. We want you to share these links, tell folks about Leader Be Led, and be a part of what we're doing in our Leader Be Led community. You know, we've done, I think, a really great job bringing guests together that are going to teach you new things, that are going to bring you to the next level of leadership. Well, today we have a guest that I couldn't be more thrilled to have. I've been following his material for a number of years now. I've used one of his books as a very important part of transitioning my team as a leader, and he is here today to impart some of his wisdom and his practical advice to you. Let me just tell you a little bit about Dr. Henry Cloud. He's an acclaimed leadership expert and a best-selling author. One of his books was named one of the business books to read recently by the Globe and Mail in Toronto. His leadership consultancy touches Fortune 500 companies around the country. He has shared the stage with Tony Blair, Dr. Condoleezza Rice, as well as a really tough guy to work with, Jack Welch, former GE chairman. So let's welcome to the show, please, our good friend, Dr. Henry Cloud. Dr. Cloud.
Hello, Al. It's good to be with you.
Well, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks so much for being part of the show.
It's a fun place. I've sort of, gotten into the way that you've approached this a little bit with the title of Lead or Be Led, because it's kind of the only two options, right?
Well, it is the only two options. And, the way I look at it is you have a choice. You can either be at the head of the pack, or you can be in the pack and doing just as important work. And it's important to be a good follower as well as a good leader. So,
and from my perspective, wherever we are in the pack, I think you are a leader, because you don't have to be at the front of the pack to be leading others. Because the way teams and organizations and performance works is that it's very contagious. And people on the team and people in the pack get higher performance from higher performers, just like we get the flu if somebody's not doing well. So I think everybody's a leader in that way.
Outstanding, and I agree with that 100%. Well, then tell me, Dr. Cloud, what makes a great leader?
Well, that's a long conversation.
Yeah, well, we wanted a nugget, though, right?
It's interesting. A lot of people define it a lot of different ways, but the way I like to think about it is that what makes a great leader is somebody that can bring a desired future into a reality.
Right.
There's a lot of people have plans and visions and what they would like to see happen or what they'd like to see people accomplish or get people to do. But it's only the great leaders that can actually turn a dream or a vision into something more than a fantasy, because it moves from fantasy when you can actually see it operating in the real world. You can feel it, you can touch it, you can go there, you're impacted by it. So to me, it's all about creating real results.
Man, I tried to throw you a curve and you had a great answer. That's amazing. So I got to ask you, really, you went from clinical psychologist to leadership expert. I mean, how did you make that leap?
Well, I think it's sort of providential. I didn't do it on purpose. What happened was I was trained as a clinical psychologist, and I also came from a business background. And what happened was when I went and knocked on doors looking for a job, my first job was in a leadership consulting firm. And what this leadership consulting firm wanted was a clinician, because boards or CEOs or executive teams would sort of identify someone. It could be the chairman, it could be the CEO, it could be a VP, it could be whoever, that needed some work in some areas individually and interpersonally. So I actually started my clinical practice in the context of sort of like the leader shrink. And what happened there for me was, because of my business background and leanings, I was very interested naturally in the context of the sport that they play, and also very interested in how personal issues and interpersonal issues affect leadership. And so basically, it was kind of like I didn't have to make a leap, because my first job kind of put me in that context. And then gradually I started working more and more in the organizations in there. And then I started a company, and it grew, and I found myself on the other side of leadership for a number of years. I had a healthcare company that grew to operate throughout the Western United States in about 40 markets, and we had psychiatric hospital units and treatment centers and all of that. And I ran that for a long time. So I've kind of been on both sides of the leadership fence as a consultant, and also having to actually figure out some stuff.
Yeah, it's funny. That's come up a couple of times with our guests, where people have a skill set and they find themselves, in a leadership position because a skill set oftentimes turns into a great business, and people don't think about the business side of being a psychologist or painting or whatever else a person's craft might be. So leadership really does come into play. You know, when I talk about what I do with this show, people say, "Well, I'm not really a leader. I just have a business with 15 or 20 people. You know, I run a business. I'm a manager." And you say, "Well, no, you're a leader." So
Now you're a leader.
yeah, I think that's really, really important. You are known for your work in boundaries. And when I first mentioned you as an author and a speaker and someone who I really admired for their knowledge and information, my wife came to me and said, "Oh, Dr. Henry Cloud, he's the boundaries guy." And boundaries in your book title, which we'll talk about in a second. But can you just, if you can, in another nugget, tell the audience what you define as a boundary?
Well, a boundary, pure and simple, is a property line. You know, if you think about your house or, your home or your apartment, there's a property line that defines the boundary of where it ends and something else begins. Now, in every relationship that requires performance, and it could be marriage, it could be parenting, it could be leadership, it could be an employee, when the boundaries get confused of who's responsible for what and who has control of what, and we start to trespass, which is to step over into somebody else's head or their space or trying to control them, or we are omitting our own responsibilities, then you lose results and you lose relationships. And to me, leadership finds itself right squarely in the middle of tethering those two things, because leadership by definition is relational, but it's about results.
Right. So that takes us to the title of your book, and I think we're going to put the book up on the screen here so folks can see what the book looks like. And it's Boundaries for Leaders, but what I really like about your subtitle, Results, Relationships, and Being, in yellow, Ridiculously in Charge. So that word ridiculously really caught my attention. Can you tell me a bit more about what the ridiculously in that subtitle means?
Well, I can't even take credit for it. Actually, was something that a CEO client of mine said one day. He leads about a $25 billion company. And we were talking about some things that were going on in his executive team and with the culture. And I said, "So why is that?" And he said, "Well, Johnny so-and-so, we got him from ABC company or, some company, and he came over here and he kind of injected that into the culture and the way he worked." I said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "Well, because," and I said, "Well, why is that?" And every time he give me an answer, I would look at him and say, "Well, why is that?" And finally he got it. And he had this moment where he looks up and he goes, "I guess I am ridiculously in charge." He got it. Meaning the ridiculous part is you're the CEO.
Yeah.
It is ridiculous how much control you have a lot of times of what goes on in your culture, what goes on in your team. And my point in the book is that a leader is ridiculously in charge, even if they're not the CEO.
Right.
Whatever you lead, you're a steward over the results and the culture and everything you're getting.
Yeah.
And there are things you can do about it.
Yeah, well, and I think one of the stages you set in the book is that the leader sets the environment. The leader creates what goes on to really create the environment of either success or failure. So, can you tell us a bit more about that? I mean, how does a leader set up that environment for success?
Well, a couple of things. I would want leaders to look at two words. In the book, I talk about they create that environment, exactly what you're saying, or they allow that environment.
Oh, okay.
Because what we see that leaders do is whatever you're getting in a culture or behavior or results or performance, there's something you're doing as a leader to, at least in part, create that reality, or there's something you're doing as a leader that's allowing that to go on. So it can be active or passive, and we all do both. And I think one of the things that leaders have to do is they have to kind of get above themselves and be leading the leader to look at what is my part in this, either actively or passively. So that sort of sets the stage. Now, if you go from there, and what do great leaders do? What the book is basically about is 7 of those things. That if you think about it for a minute now, every leader basically kind of does the same thing. They they envision some sort of a result they want, a future, a desired state, however the literature puts it that day. And then what they do is they engage talent to go make that happen, and then they execute against some sort of a plan,
Right.
and then they measure that, and they hold people accountable, and then they fix it.
Right.
Now, that's true of a mom who's trying to get a bunch of kids into a van for school,
Right.
or it's true of a CEO. So if that's what leadership does, it moves people from A to Z, why do some leaders, if we're all doing the same thing, why do some get results and others don't? And one of the key reasons that we know is that leaders that get results are leading people in ways that the people's brains can actually follow them and actually can perform. And so what the book is about, it's about 7 of those things that leaders bring to the environment and bring to the interaction and bring to the culture that actually cause that to happen from a neuroscience perspective.
Well, I mean, we as people, we're all different. So, how one might relate to me may be very different than how one may relate to Charlie.
Right.
That's next to me. So, do leaders have to have varied relationships in order to achieve this?
Well, it's a very, very good question. Some of the earliest groundbreaking research done in that whole area of questions was by Blanchard, who kind of proved that there's not one kind of leader that's best for every situation, because leadership is field dependent, meaning that sometimes a very autocratic controlling style is exactly what's needed.
Sure.
Sometimes a very consensual kind of open-ended style is what's needed. But if you're at war in a foxhole, you don't need to be sitting around kind of asking open-ended questions. You got to take charge.
Right.
And so it does vary situationally, but here's the thing. No matter what kind of situation, and this is what's important, I think, about what the book says, that brains work the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So whether you are one kind of personality style, if you go take, the disc or the Myers-Briggs or some other instrument, it's going to show your leadership style, but the brain is a brain is a brain.
Right.
And we know about how leaders interact with their own styles, they still have to be leading in ways that the neurochemistry of the people they're working with can actually fire the bullets. And that's what's important.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to bring a flip chart in the foxhole,
Right.
and list all the reasons why we should or we shouldn't do the bullet return.
Foxhole.
What's that? I'm sorry?
How about a trust fall or a ropes course in a foxhole?
Exactly right. Yeah.
I get that question so often. People say, you do leadership consulting, and I go, oh yeah, you do like ropes courses, and I go, dude, no, we're trying to fix a business. We get in the boardroom and we look at what is the business about, what drives the bottom line, and what are the behaviors that leaders need to do to move that needle.
Right.
That's what leadership's about.
Right.
Not that I'm against foxhole trust falls, but
No, I get that.
Sometimes you got to work on the actual business.
Well, I find it interesting too. Is that when you look at Steve Jobs and what's been written about him since he passed away, there are various levels of what a Steve Jobs has been portrayed as a leader.
Right.
Kind of rough around the edges, get things done when he's on a one-to-one basis with some people. Yet he had that vast capacity to be as creative as possible, but yet concentrate on one or two or three really. And there are very few products you call beautiful, but beautiful products like the iPhone or the iPad, and so that's a multi-layered leader, no?
Yeah, it is, and it's a very, very important question, because we do know this about him and other leaders, that he had these incredible strengths, and he had some pretty glaring dysfunction, right?
Yep.
And we know that that got in the way a lot of times. And this is what you'll always hear. And it's amazing how much you hear this question. People will say, well, so-and-so's a great leader, but what makes him a great leader is what makes him a nightmare to work for.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And that is just not true.
Mm-hmm.
What made Steve Jobs a great leader is a number of things that actually are the brain functions that I talk about in the book. But those abilities that he had, here's the right question. What could he have accomplished if his screaming and controlling behavior sometimes didn't drive very talented people away into another place or stall them out or have them go hide or not be able to function for the rest of the day.
Right.
So it's not the weaknesses that make the strengths work. That's not what happens. And leaders have to get their arms around the ways in which their own issues are getting in the way of their strengths, and that's the focus.
Yeah, well, that's a fascinating topic of discussion, and one that I think we probably could talk hours about. And it's when you look at the subject of leadership and what makes a great leader, I think people mistake the fact that this great leader is also above human. And the reality is, lots of leaders have weaknesses, and lots of leaders have strengths. And I think you've as you've just said, you've summed it up pretty nicely, that we can work very hard on the things that are preventing us from being a great leader, and try to minimize those things. Hey folks, we are going to interrupt this interview and split it in two pieces because there's so much great information from Dr. Henry Cloud. So what I'm going to ask you to do is tune in again next week to see part 2 of this 2-part interview with Dr. Henry Cloud. There's so much good material and so much I want you to hear that we're going to do it in 2 pieces. See you next week on Leader Be Led.